The scent of fresh bread had once drawn half the town through the door of Clara Rosewood's bakery. But on this particular morning in June of 1883, she stood alone behind her counter in White Oaks, New Mexico, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight while her oven sat cold and empty. Clara wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron for the third time in as many minutes, though there was no flour there to wipe away. She had stopped baking 2 days ago when it became clear that no one was coming. The rumors had spread faster than wildfire through dry brush, and just as destructive. Someone had whispered that she used spoiled ingredients to save money, that her bread had made the Henderson children sick, that she was cutting costs in dangerous ways because her business was failing. None of it was true, but truth seemed to matter little when fear took hold. She had built this bakery from nothing after arriving in White Oaks 3 years ago. A young woman of 22 with nothing but her grandmother's recipes, and a determination to make her own way in the world. Her parents had died of fever back in Missouri, leaving her with barely enough money for the train west and the down payment on this small building on the edge of town. Every morning before dawn, she had fired up her ovens and baked until her back ached and her hands were red from the heat. She had earned every customer through hard work and quality, and now she was watching it all crumble because of lies. The bell above her door chimed, and Clara looked up with a spark of hope that immediately dimmed when she saw who entered. Margaret Walsh, the banker's wife, swept in with her usual air of superiority, her silk dress rustling as she approached the counter. But she did not come to buy anything. Instead, she pressed her handkerchief to her nose as though the bakery itself was contaminated. "Clara, dear, I simply had to come speak with you," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Everyone is so concerned about you. Perhaps it would be best if you closed up shop for a while until this all blows over. You understand, do you not? People are frightened for their children." Clara felt her jaw tighten. "There is nothing wrong with my baking, Mrs. Walsh. The Henderson children were sick with influenza that half the town caught. It had nothing to do with my bread." "Well, that is what you say, but can you prove it?" Margaret's eyes glittered with something that was not quite concern. "I am only thinking of what is best for the community, and for you, of course." Before Clara could respond, the door opened again, and a man she had never seen before stepped inside. He was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. Dust covered his boots and the lower half of his worn denim pants, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who spent more time on horseback than on his feet. A cowboy, clearly, though his face was unfamiliar. He could not have been much older than Clara herself, perhaps 25 or 26. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow filled the small space. His gaze moved from Margaret to Clara, and something in his expression softened when he looked at her. "This is the bakery, it is," Clara said, straightening her shoulders, "though I am afraid I am not baking today." "Why not?" The cowboy moved closer to the counter, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. "I have been riding since dawn, and I was told this was the best bakery in Lincoln County. Was I misinformed?" Margaret made a small sound of dismay. "Sir, you should know that there have been concerns about the quality of the goods here. For health reasons, I really cannot recommend." "I did not ask you, madam," the cowboy said, his tone polite but firm. His eyes never left Clara's face. "I asked her." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or gratitude she could not say. "I have not been baking because I have no customers, sir. There have been rumors that my goods made people sick, though it is not true. I use only the finest ingredients, and I have never cut corners or used anything that was not fresh and wholesome." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, and Clara had the strange sensation that he could see right through to her heart, could measure the truth of her words by some internal scale that had nothing to do with gossip or fear. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Rosewood." "Miss Rosewood, my name is Isaac Quinn. I work for the Murphy Ranch about 15 miles south of here. I am in town buying supplies for the summer drive, and I need provisions. A lot of them." He pulled off his hat and set it on the counter between them, a gesture that felt oddly intimate in its casualness. "If you are willing to bake, I am willing to buy everything you can make." Clara's heart leaped, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Everything, everything," Isaac confirmed. "Bread, rolls, biscuits, whatever you have got. The ranch hands are tired of my cooking, and the boss told me not to come back without something decent to feed the crew. Can you do it?" "I can have fresh bread ready by this evening and more tomorrow morning," Clara said, her mind already racing through what she had in her pantry. She had enough flour and yeast, enough butter and salt. She had kept her supplies stocked even after the customers stopped coming, unable to quite give up hope. "Then I will be back this evening." Isaac picked up his hat and nodded to her, then turned to Margaret Walsh. "Madam, you might want to tell your friends that the Murphy Ranch stands behind Miss Rosewood's baking. We do not buy from anyone we do not trust, and we are feeding 40 men with her goods. If there was anything wrong with her kitchen, we would know it." Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Well, I suppose if the ranch is satisfied." "We are more than satisfied," Isaac said, "and I will be sure to spread the word." He placed his hat back on his head and touched the brim in Clara's direction. "Until this evening, Miss Rosewood." After he left, the bakery seemed quieter somehow, as though his presence had filled more space than his physical form should have occupied. Margaret made a hasty exit shortly after, muttering about errands she needed to run, and Clara found herself alone again. But this time, the solitude felt different. This time, she had work to do. She fired up her ovens with trembling hands, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. A stranger had walked into her shop and offered her a lifeline without knowing anything about her, except what he could read in her face. It was more than kindness. It felt like faith. As the ovens heated and she began measuring out flour, Clara realized she was humming, an old tune her grandmother used to sing while baking. The familiar motions soothed her nerves and steadied her hands. She mixed and kneaded, shaped and scored, sliding loaves into the oven with practiced efficiency. The smell of baking bread began to fill the shop, warm and yeasty and absolutely normal. There was nothing sinister here, nothing dangerous. Just honest work and good ingredients transformed by heat and time into something nourishing. When Isaac Quinn returned that evening, the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara had 12 loaves of bread cooling on racks, along with 3 dozen biscuits and 2 large batches of cinnamon rolls that she had made on impulse, remembering how her grandmother always said a little sweetness made everything better. Isaac's eyes widened when he saw the spread laid out on the counter. "Miss Rosewood, you have outdone yourself." "I wanted to make sure you had variety," Clara said, trying not to sound as anxious as she felt. "The bread will stay fresh for several days if you keep it wrapped in cloth, and the biscuits are good for breakfast or dinner. The cinnamon rolls are best eaten soon, though they can be warmed up over a fire if needed." Isaac picked up one of the cinnamon rolls and took a bite, and Clara watched his expression change from polite interest to genuine pleasure. "These are incredible," he said after swallowing. "I have not had anything this good since my mother's baking, and that is saying something." Pride and relief flooded through Clara in equal measure. "Thank you. I am glad they meet your standards. They exceed them." Isaac pulled out his wallet and began counting bills onto the counter. "How much do I owe you?" Clara calculated quickly in her head, then named a price that was fair but not excessive. She would not take advantage of his kindness, even though she desperately needed the money. Isaac counted out the amount, then added several bills on top of it. "For the quality and the quick turnaround," he said when Clara started to protest. "And because I have a feeling I will be back for more." As he loaded the baked goods into the crates he had brought, Clara worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her all afternoon. "Mr. Quinn, why did you do this? You do not know me. You could have bought supplies anywhere." Isaac paused in his work and looked at her directly. "I grew up in a small town in Texas. When I was 16, my father was accused of stealing cattle that he did not steal. The whole town turned against him before anyone bothered to find out the truth. It nearly destroyed our family. By the time the real thief was caught, my father had already lost his reputation and most of his friends." He picked up another loaf and wrapped it carefully in the cloth Clara provided. "I saw the same thing happening here today. That woman in the silk dress, she did not care about the truth. She had already made up her mind. But when I looked at you, I saw someone who was being honest, so I decided to trust that." "You could have been wrong," Clara said softly. "I could have been," Isaac agreed, "but I was not. These cinnamon rolls prove it." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges that the sun and wind had carved there. "Besides, sometimes you have to take a chance on people. Otherwise, what is the point of anything?" Clara found herself smiling back, something warm and bright unfurling in her chest. "Will you really tell people at the ranch about the bakery?" "I will tell everyone I meet," Isaac promised, "and I will be back tomorrow to buy more for the bunkhouse. We go through food like locusts through a wheat field, so you will have steady business from us if you want it." "I want it," Clara said quickly. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I might," Isaac said quietly. He finished loading the last crate and hoisted it into his arms. "And please, call me Isaac. Mr. Quinn makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and sitting behind a desk instead of riding the range." "Then you should call me Clara," she said. "Miss Rosewood sounds like someone much older and more dignified than I am." "I think you are plenty dignified," Isaac said. "Standing up to that Walsh woman took courage. Not everyone would have kept their composure like that." After he left, Clara cleaned her kitchen and closed up shop with a lightness in her step that had been absent for weeks. She climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the bakery and made herself a simple dinner, but she was too excited to eat much. Instead, she sat by her window and watched the stars come out, thinking about storm-gray eyes and a slow Texas drawl and the way Isaac Quinn had looked at her like she was someone worth believing in. True to his word, Isaac returned the next morning, and the morning after that. Each time he came, he bought more goods, and each time he stayed a little longer, leaning against Clara's counter and talking while she worked. She learned that he had left Texas 5 years ago after his mother died, that he was the youngest of 4 brothers, that he loved the open range but sometimes missed having a place to call home. He told her about the Murphy Ranch, which ran cattle across thousands of acres and employed dozens of cowboys during the busy season. He made her laugh with stories about ornery steers and practical jokes in the bunkhouse, and he listened with genuine interest when she talked about her grandmother's recipes and her dreams of expanding the bakery someday. On the 4th day, Clara noticed that other customers were starting to return. First it was the blacksmith, who said he had heard from the Murphy Ranch hands that Clara's bread was the best in the territory. Then came the school teacher, who admitted she had always loved Clara's sweet rolls and was glad the ridiculous rumors had been disproved. By the end of the week, Clara's bakery was busier than it had been before the rumors started, and she found herself needing to get up even earlier to keep up with demand. Margaret Walsh never apologized, but she did stop spreading gossip, which Clara supposed was the closest thing to contrition she was likely to get. The Henderson family came by to personally assure Clara that they knew the influenza had nothing to do with her bakery, and Mrs. Henderson bought a berry pie as a peace offering through it all. Isaac kept coming back. Even after it became clear that Clara's business was thriving again, he continued to stop by the bakery whenever he was in town. Sometimes he bought provisions for the ranch, but sometimes he just bought a single cinnamon roll and sat at the small table Clara had set up by the window, watching her work while he ate. "You ever take a break?" he asked one afternoon in late July, after Clara had been going nonstop since before dawn. "I take breaks," Clara said, though she could not remember the last time she had actually sat down during business hours. "Take one now," Isaac suggested. "Come outside with me." "It is too nice a day to spend entirely indoors." Clara looked around her shop. The afternoon rush had passed, and she had already prepared everything she needed for tomorrow morning. "I suppose I could close up for an hour," she said slowly. "That is the spirit." Isaac stood and held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but steady. He led her out into the summer sunshine, and Clara blinked against the brightness after hours in her dim bakery. They walked down the main street of White Oaks, past the mercantile and the saloon and the bank where Margaret Walsh's husband counted his money. Isaac kept her hand tucked into his arm, a gesture that felt both protective and companionable. People nodded to them as they passed, and Clara noticed the knowing looks and small smiles. Let them gossip, she thought. After what she had been through, a little romantic speculation seemed harmless. "There is a spot I want to show you," Isaac said, guiding her off the main road and onto a smaller path that led toward the edge of town. "I found it the first time I came to White Oaks, and I have been thinking you might like it." The path wound through scrub brush and juniper trees before opening up to a small rise that overlooked the valley below. From here, Clara could see for miles, the land stretching out in shades of gold and brown and green, marked by distant mountains and the silver thread of a river. The wind blew steadier here, carrying the scent of sage and dust and something wild that Clara could not name. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I thought you might think so," Isaac said. He had not let go of her hand. "You spend so much time in that bakery, surrounded by walls." "I wanted you to remember how big the world is." Clara looked up at him, this man who had walked into her life barely a month ago and changed everything. "Why do you care so much about what I remember?" "Because I am falling in love with you," Isaac said simply. "I have been falling since the first moment I saw you, standing behind that counter with your chin up and your eyes blazing, refusing to back down, even when everyone else had turned against you. I know it is fast, and I know I have no right to say it when we have barely known each other any time at all, but I have never been good at keeping my feelings to myself. My brothers always said I wore my heart on my sleeve, and I suppose they were right." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Isaac, you do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I am not asking you for promises or declarations. I just wanted you to know where I stand. I wanted you to know that when I come to your bakery, it is not just for the cinnamon rolls, though those are mighty fine. It is because seeing you is the best part of my day. It is because your smile makes me believe that good things are possible in this world. It is because—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I am making a mess of this." "No," Clara said, stepping closer to him. "You are not." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jaw, the warmth of his skin under her fingertips. "I have been falling too. I did not want to admit it, even to myself, because it seemed too soon and too unlikely. But every morning I wake up hoping you will come by, and every evening I replay our conversations in my head like they are precious things worth memorizing. You saved my business, Isaac, but more than that, you reminded me that there are still people in this world worth trusting." Isaac turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving her face. "Clara, I need you to understand something. I am just a cowboy. I do not own land or have money saved up. Right now, I live in a bunkhouse with 20 other men, and I spend my days eating dust and chasing cattle. I cannot offer you much. You offered me everything when you bought out my bakery that first day," Clara said. "You offered me hope when I had none left. You stood up for me when no one else would. That is worth more than land or money." "You deserve someone who can give you security," Isaac said, but his hand had moved to her waist, pulling her closer. "Someone who can buy you a proper house and make sure you never have to worry about anything again." "What I deserve is someone who sees me for who I am and cares about me anyway," Clara said. "What I deserve is someone honest and kind and brave enough to fight against injustice, even when it does not benefit them personally. I found that someone, Isaac. I found you." The kiss, when it came, was as gentle as it was inevitable. Isaac's lips were warm against hers, and Clara felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, like the whole world had narrowed down to this moment, this man, this feeling. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "I want to do this right." "Then court me," Clara whispered. "Take me walking on Sundays and come have dinner in my apartment above the bakery. Tell me more stories about Texas and your brothers and what you want out of life. Let me learn all the things about you that I do not yet know." "And when I know enough," Isaac asked, "when we have courted properly and everyone in town accepts that we are meant for each other, what then?" "Then you ask me to marry you," Clara said, feeling bold and certain and more alive than she had in years. "And I will say yes." Isaac laughed, the sound bright and surprised and full of joy. "You are sure of that, are you?" "I am sure," Clara confirmed. "But you still have to ask properly when the time comes." "I will," Isaac promised. "I will ask you in a way that you will remember for the rest of your life." They stayed on that hill until the sun began to sink low, talking about everything and nothing, stealing kisses when the words ran out, learning the shape of each other's hands and the sound of each other's laughter. When they finally made their way back to town, the sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, and Clara felt like she was walking on air. The courtship that followed was the talk of white oaks. Isaac made a point of being obvious in his affection, taking Clara on picnics and walks, attending church with her on Sundays, sitting in her bakery whenever he was in town. He was courting her, yes, but he was also making a statement. Clara Rosewood was under his protection, and anyone who spread rumors about her would answer to him, not that he ever had to make threats. Isaac's method was subtler and more effective. He simply told the truth everywhere he went. He told the men at the ranch about Clara's baking. He told the customers at the mercantile about her kindness. He told everyone who would listen about how she had been wronged by gossip and how she had faced it with grace and courage. He became her champion, her defender, but he did it in a way that highlighted her strength rather than suggesting she needed saving. Clara's business flourished. She hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the morning rush, and together they turned out more bread, pies, cakes, and pastries than Clara could have managed alone. The bakery became a gathering place, somewhere people came not just for food but for the warm atmosphere and the knowledge that they would be treated fairly. In September, Isaac got promoted to foreman at the Murphy Ranch, a position that came with better pay and a small cabin on the property instead of a bunk in the shared quarters. He rode into town the day after receiving the news, his face split in a grin so wide that Clara knew something good had happened before he even spoke. "I have my own place now," he said, picking her up and spinning her around right there in the bakery, much to the amusement of the customers. "It is not much, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it is mine. Well, it comes with the job, but still, I have a home, Clara, a real home." "I am so proud of you," Clara said, cupping his face in her hands. "You worked so hard for this." "We worked hard," Isaac corrected. "You inspired me to want more, to reach for better things. Before I met you, I was content to just drift, to take whatever came my way. But now I want to build something. I want a future." "I want that too," Clara said softly. Isaac set her down gently, his expression turning serious. "Then let me give you one. Marry me, Clara. I know it has only been a few months, but I am more certain of this than I have ever been of anything. Marry me and come live at the ranch. You can keep the bakery if you want, or sell it, or hire someone to run it, whatever makes you happy. I just want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to build a life together. A real life with a home and children and all the ordinary beautiful things that make life worth living." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "This is you asking properly." "This is me asking with my whole heart," Isaac said. "I love you, Clara Rosewood. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you, Isaac Quinn." The wedding took place in October, on a clear, cool day when the leaves on the cottonwood trees had turned gold, and the air smelled of autumn. Clara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that the dressmaker had worked on for weeks, and Isaac wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortably formal, until Clara saw the familiar warmth in his eyes and knew he was still her cowboy underneath the fine clothes. They were married in the small church at the center of white oaks, surrounded by what felt like the entire town. The Murphy Ranch hands filled 3 whole pews, and Clara's hired help Sarah stood up as her bridesmaid. Even Margaret Walsh attended, though she sat in the back and left before the reception. The Reverend kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt, speaking about love and partnership, and the courage it took to bind your life to another person's. When Isaac slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, a simple gold band that he had bought with his first foreman's wages, she felt the weight of it like a promise, like a future taking solid shape. "I love you," Isaac whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, and Clara whispered it back, the words almost lost in the applause and cheering from their guests. The reception was held in the field behind the church, with tables laden with food that Clara had spent days preparing with Sarah's help. There was dancing and music and toasts that ranged from funny to touching to slightly scandalous. Isaac danced with Clara until her feet ached, and even then, she did not want to stop, did not want this perfect day to end. As the sun began to set, Isaac borrowed a horse and wagon from the livery and helped Clara climb up beside him. They rode out of white oaks to the sound of well wishes and laughter, heading south toward the Murphy Ranch and the small cabin that would be their first real home together. The cabin was indeed small, but Isaac had spent weeks fixing it up. He had patched the roof and replaced the broken windows, had built new furniture and painted the walls a clean white. There was an iron stove for cooking, a table with 2 chairs, and a bed frame that Isaac had constructed himself, sturdy and wide enough for 2. Clara walked through the space slowly, touching everything, imagining the life they would build here. "It is perfect," she said finally, turning to find Isaac watching her anxiously from the doorway. "Absolutely perfect. Are you sure?" Isaac asked. "I know it is not much compared to your apartment in town, and you will be farther from the bakery now. If you want, we can look for something in White Oaks, something bigger and closer to." Clara stopped his words with a kiss, pouring all her love and certainty into it. "This is perfect because you are here," she said when they finally broke apart. "That is all I need." That night, they consummated their marriage in the bed Isaac had built, learning each other's bodies with a mixture of tenderness and passion. Clara had been nervous, had worried about the intimacy that would come with marriage, but Isaac was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the quilts, listening to the sounds of the night outside their window. Isaac traced lazy patterns on Clara's bare shoulder, and she rested her head on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" Isaac asked quietly. "Happier than I have ever been," Clara said honestly. "You, beyond words," Isaac said. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy with nothing but good intentions." "Thank you for taking a chance on a baker everyone had turned against," Clara countered. "You saved me, Isaac." "No," Isaac said firmly. "You saved yourself. You kept your integrity and your standards even when it would have been easier to give up. I just reminded people of what they should have seen all along." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Clara dreamed of a future bright with possibility. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Clara had to learn to balance running the bakery with keeping house at the ranch. She ended up hiring Sarah full-time to manage the bakery during the week, coming into town herself only 3 days a week to do the specialty baking and handle the accounts. The rest of the time, she spent at the ranch, learning to be a ranch wife. It was harder than she had expected. The work was different from what she was used to, more physical and less predictable. She learned to manage the vegetable garden, to preserve food for the winter, to cook for not just Isaac but whatever ranch hands stopped by their cabin for a meal. She learned to deal with the isolation, the long days when Isaac was out working the range and she was alone with only her thoughts and her chores for company. But there were beautiful moments too. There were evenings when Isaac came home dusty and exhausted and still lit up at the sight of her. There were mornings when they woke tangled together and made love as the sun rose. There were Sundays spent riding together across the range, Isaac showing her the land he loved and Clara learning to love it too. There were quiet nights by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting in comfortable silence. In March, Clara missed her monthly courses. She tried not to hope too much, tried not to read anything into the way her breasts felt tender or the way certain smells suddenly made her nauseous. But when a month passed, and then another without her courses returning, she finally allowed herself to believe what her body was telling her. She was pregnant. Clara told Isaac on a Sunday evening when they were sitting on the porch watching the stars come out. She had been trying to find the right moment all day, the right words to share the news, but in the end, she just blurted it out. "I am going to have a baby." Isaac went very still beside her. Then he turned to look at her, his eyes wide and searching. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation," Clara said. "But yes, I think so. I am about 2 months along, I believe." A smile spread across Isaac's face, slow and wondering and absolutely radiant. "We are going to be parents." "We are," Clara confirmed, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time, all the emotion she had been holding back spilling over. "We are going to have a baby, Isaac." Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart racing. "I love you," he said fiercely. "I love you so much, Clara. You have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now this. A family. A real family." "I love you too," Clara said, burrowing into his embrace. "Are you happy about it?" "I know we have not been married long and money is still tight, and I am thrilled about it," Isaac interrupted. "Terrified and overwhelmed and completely thrilled. We will figure out the rest. We always do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Clara had to cut back even more on her time at the bakery as her body changed and grew. Sarah proved capable of running things largely on her own, and Clara found herself settling more fully into life at the ranch. The other ranch wives welcomed her, teaching her their tricks for dealing with everything from difficult laundry to difficult cattle. She made friends, real friends, women who understood the challenges and rewards of ranch life. Isaac was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about whether Clara was doing too much or not eating enough or getting enough rest. She found it endearing even when it was annoying, this proof that he cared so deeply about her well-being. In November, on a cold, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Clara went into labor. The ranch wife who served as midwife was summoned, and Isaac paced outside the cabin like a caged animal, refusing to leave even though Clara's labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Clara gave birth to a son. He came into the world squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, and when the midwife placed him in Clara's arms, she felt a love so overwhelming that it eclipsed everything that had come before. Isaac was allowed in after Clara had been cleaned up and the baby swaddled. He approached the bed tentatively, like he was afraid he might break something, and looked down at his son with an expression of pure awe. "He is so small," Isaac whispered. "He is perfect," Clara said. "Do you want to hold him?" Isaac nodded, not trusting his voice, and carefully took the baby from Clara's arms. He held his son with surprising competence for a man who had never handled an infant before, supporting the head and keeping the blanket secure. The baby stopped fussing and blinked up at Isaac with unfocused blue eyes, and Clara watched her husband fall completely in love. "Hello there, little one," Isaac said softly. "I am your papa, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to be a good one. I am going to teach you to ride and rope and treat people fairly. I am going to make sure you grow up knowing that your word is your bond, and that reputation matters less than character. I am going to love you and your mama with everything I have for as long as I live." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she listened. "That was beautiful." "I have been practicing," Isaac admitted, looking up at her with a sheepish grin. "I wanted to have something good to say when I met him." "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They had discussed names during the pregnancy, but had never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Clara found that some of the names they had considered did not seem to fit. "What about James?" Isaac suggested. "It was my father's name. He would have loved to meet his grandson." "James Quinn," Clara said, testing the sound of it. "I like it. James Isaac Quinn, after both his papa and his grandfather." "James Isaac Quinn it is," Isaac agreed. He brought the baby back to Clara and helped settle them both comfortably against the pillows. Then he sat on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around his wife and child. "We made this," he said wonderingly. "Out of love and faith and hope, we made this perfect little person." "We did," Clara agreed. She leaned her head against Isaac's shoulder, exhausted but happier than she had imagined possible. "We did." The years that followed were full and busy and rich with meaning. James grew from a helpless infant into a curious toddler, and then an energetic little boy who followed his father around the ranch whenever he was allowed. Clara eventually sold the bakery to Sarah, who had proven herself more than capable and had fallen in love with a local carpenter. The sale gave Clara and Isaac enough money to buy their cabin outright from the ranch and to add on 2 more rooms as their family grew. When James was 3, Clara gave birth to twin daughters, Catherine and Alice, who were as different as 2 people could be despite being born minutes apart. Catherine was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and watch the world, while Alice was constantly moving, constantly exploring, getting into every kind of mischief imaginable. Isaac proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He was patient with the children's endless questions, playful during their games, firm but loving when discipline was needed. He taught James to ride before the boy was 5, holding him steady in the saddle and cheering his progress. He braided the girls' hair with surprisingly gentle hands and told them stories about brave women and kind hearts. Clara found a new purpose in motherhood, though she never entirely gave up baking. She still made bread and pastries for the ranch, and her cinnamon rolls remained legendary throughout Lincoln County. But now her primary focus was her family, raising her children to be good people and maintaining the home she and Isaac had built together. The ranch prospered under Isaac's management. He was promoted to assistant manager when James was 7, a position that came with more responsibility, but also more respect and significantly better pay. They were able to expand their cabin into a proper house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a real kitchen for Clara. It was not fancy, but it was comfortable and full of love. White Oaks changed over the years, too. The gold mines that had sustained the town began to play out, and some families moved away in search of better opportunities. But the town adapted, becoming more focused on ranching and farming, and it remained a close-knit community where people looked out for each other. Margaret Walsh eventually apologized to Clara, an awkward conversation that happened by chance when they were both at the mercantile. Margaret admitted that she had been the source of many of the original rumors, driven by jealousy over Clara's successful business and fear that her own status in town was being threatened. Clara accepted the apology, though the 2 women never became friends. Some wounds could be forgiven but not entirely forgotten on their 10th wedding anniversary. Isaac surprised Clara with a trip back to White Oaks to visit the old bakery building. It had changed hands twice since Sarah sold it and was now a dress shop, but Clara could still remember exactly where everything had been, could still smell the phantom scent of bread baking. "You miss it?" Isaac asked as they stood outside looking at the familiar storefront. "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "I miss the routine of it, the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands, but I would not trade what I have now for anything. I have you, I have our children, I have a life beyond anything I dreamed possible when I first came west." "I still remember the first time I saw you," Isaac said, pulling her close. "Standing behind that counter with your whole world falling apart around you and you refusing to break, you were the bravest person I had ever met." "I did not feel brave," Clara said. "I felt terrified." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Isaac said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You taught me that." They walked back through the town, hand in hand, stopping to greet old friends and catch up on news. Clara realized that White Oaks would always be part of her story, the place where she had faced her worst moment and found her greatest love. The town had tested her and nearly broken her, but it had also given her Isaac, and that made everything worthwhile. The children grew older. James proved to have his father's gift with horses and his mother's business sense. By the time he was 15, he was helping Isaac manage the ranch's breeding program and had earned the respect of the hands who worked under him. The twins developed their own interests as well, Catherine loved books and learning, often riding into town to borrow volumes from the small library that had been established in the old schoolhouse. Alice, meanwhile, was happiest outdoors, riding the range with her father and brother, as fearless and skilled as any cowboy twice her age. Isaac's brothers came to visit when James was 16. All three of them made the journey from Texas, bringing their own families, and for a week the house was full of laughter and stories and good-natured teasing. Clara watched Isaac with his brothers and saw a side of him she rarely glimpsed. The youngest sibling who was still trying to prove himself even though he had long since made his own success. One evening, after the children and nieces and nephews had been put to bed, and the brothers were sitting around the fire, the eldest brother Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To Isaac," he said, "the baby brother who did not need our advice but made his own way anyway. You have built something good here, little brother. A home, a family, a reputation that stretches across 3 counties. Father would have been proud." Isaac's eyes were suspiciously bright as he returned the toast. "I learned from the best. You 3 taught me everything that mattered." "Not everything," Thomas corrected, looking at Clara. "Your wife taught you the most important lessons, how to fight for what you believe in, how to stand by people when everyone else has turned away, how to build something from nothing and make it last. Those lessons did not come from us." "They came from Clara," Isaac agreed, reaching for her hand. "Everything good in my life came from Clara. After the brothers left, life settled back into its comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to thrive. The children continued to grow, and Clara and Isaac continued to love each other with the same intensity that had first brought them together. When James was 18, he announced that he wanted to start his own horse breeding operation on a piece of land adjacent to the ranch. Isaac and Clara helped him secure a loan and get started, proud of their son's ambition and independence. Catherine declared her intention to become a teacher, and the family pooled their resources to send her to the normal school in Santa Fe. Alice, at 16, was still figuring out what she wanted, but she was happy helping her father on the ranch and had no immediate plans to leave. On a warm summer evening in 1898, Clara and Isaac sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had learned to love. They were both in their late 30s now, their hair showing threads of silver, their faces marked by sun and time and the wear of hard work. But when Isaac looked at Clara, he still saw the brave young woman who had faced down a town's prejudice with nothing but her integrity. And when Clara looked at Isaac, she still saw the cowboy who had believed in her when no one else would. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Clara asked, leaning her head on Isaac's shoulder. "If you had not walked into my bakery that day, if you had believed the rumors like everyone else." "I think about it sometimes," Isaac admitted. "And I thank God every time that I trusted my instincts, that I saw the truth in your eyes and decided to take a chance." "We both took a chance," Clara said. "And look what came of it. 3 wonderful children, a successful ranch, a life we built together from nothing." "From love," Isaac corrected. "We built it from love." Inside the house, they could hear Alice singing while she washed the dishes, her voice clear and sweet. From the barn came the sound of James working with one of the horses, the low murmur of his voice as he calmed the animal. And somewhere in town, Catherine was likely reading by lamplight, preparing for the future she had chosen. "I am so proud of them," Clara said softly. "I am proud of all of us, of everything we have accomplished." "So am I," Isaac said. He turned to kiss Clara, a sweet, gentle kiss that still held echoes of that first kiss on the hilltop 15 years ago. "I love you, Clara Quinn. I have loved you since the moment I met you, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Clara said. You are my hero, Isaac. You always will be." They sat together until full dark, talking and dreaming and remembering, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth living. The bakery was long gone, but the lessons Clara had learned there remained. The importance of integrity, the value of hard work, the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. Those lessons had shaped her life and the lives of her children, a legacy more valuable than any amount of money or property. As the stars came out above New Mexico, Clara felt a deep sense of contentment. Her journey had not been easy. She had faced cruelty and loss, had been tested in ways she could not have imagined when she first came west with nothing but her grandmother's recipes and a dream of independence. But she had survived, had thrived, had found love in the most unexpected place. Isaac's arms tightened around her, and Clara smiled in the darkness. This was home, she thought. Not a place but a person, not a building but a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. This was everything she had ever wanted, everything she had ever needed. The years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. Clara and Isaac grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year into something steady and unshakable, a foundation upon which everything else in their lives was built. They became grandparents when James married a girl from a neighboring ranch and presented them with a grandson, followed by two granddaughters in quick succession. Catherine returned from teaching in Santa Fe with a gentle schoolteacher husband, and they settled in White Oaks, where Catherine took over the school that had once educated her. Alice, true to her independent nature, married a cowboy from Colorado and moved north, though she wrote long letters and visited whenever she could. The Murphy Ranch changed hands when the original owner died, but the new owner recognized Isaac's value and kept him on as manager with a generous salary and the promise that the cabin and surrounding acres would be deeded to him upon retirement. It was more security than Isaac had ever dreamed of having when he was a young cowboy living in a bunkhouse and wondering if he would ever have anything to call his own. In 1905, when they had been married for 22 years, Isaac and Clara traveled to Texas so that Isaac could show her the land where he had grown up. They visited his father's grave, and Clara laid flowers on it while Isaac stood with his hat in his hands and told his father about the life he had built. "I wish you could have met her, Pa," Isaac said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I wish you could have met my wife and seen what we made together. You would have liked her. She is strong like Ma was, but in a different way. She does not back down when things get hard. She just keeps going, keeps believing that things will work out if you do what is right." Clara stood beside him, her hand in his, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The cruel rumors that had nearly destroyed her, the cowboy who had walked into her bakery and changed everything, the love that had grown between them like something wild and precious and impossible to contain. It all felt like destiny, like every step had been leading her toward this man and this life. On the train back to New Mexico, Clara watched the landscape roll past and felt Isaac's hand warm in hers. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Texas?" she asked. "I used to," Isaac admitted. "When I first left, I spent a lot of time wondering if I had made a mistake, if I should have stayed and helped rebuild what we lost. But then I met you, and I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Everything that happened before, all the hardship and wandering and uncertainty, it was leading me to you." "I feel the same," Clara said. "I used to mourn the life I lost when my parents died. Used to wish I could go back to being a girl in Missouri who did not have to fight for every scrap of happiness. But if I had not lost them, I would never have come west. I would never have opened the bakery or faced the rumors or been standing behind that counter when you walked in. I would have missed all of this." Isaac raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "We are quite the pair, are we not? Two people who lost everything and found each other in the ruins." "We found more than each other," Clara said. "We found a way forward. We found hope." The train carried them home to New Mexico, to the ranch and the house and the grandchildren who were waiting impatiently for their return. Alice had come down from Colorado for a visit and was staying with James and his growing family, and Catherine had promised to bring her husband and children out from town. It would be a full house, noisy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. That evening, with the whole family gathered around the dinner table that Isaac had built 20 years ago, Clara looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt her heart swell with gratitude. James sat at one end of the table with his wife beside him, their children squirming in their chairs. Catherine and her husband were deep in conversation with Alice about politics and education and the changing world. The grandchildren were laughing and talking over each other, full of energy and life and possibility. And Isaac sat beside her, his hand resting on her knee under the table, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at something James said. Her cowboy, her hero, her love. The man who had taken a chance on a baker everyone else had abandoned, who had spread the truth when lies had nearly destroyed her, who had loved her with a fierce loyalty that had never wavered in all their years together. After dinner, after the children had been put to bed and the house had quieted down, Isaac and Clara walked out to the porch as they did every evening. The ritual had not changed in 20 years. They sat together on the bench Isaac had built, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air, and talked about their day. "I have been thinking," Isaac said, his arm around Clara's shoulders. "When I retire from the ranch in a few years, I want to build you something special. A bakehouse, maybe, just for you. Somewhere you can bake whenever you want, teach the grandchildren your grandmother's recipes, keep that part of yourself alive." Clara turned to look at him, surprised and touched. "Isaac, you do not have to do that." "I know I do not have to," Isaac said. "I want to. You gave up the bakery for our family, and I know you never regretted it, but I also know you miss it sometimes. I see it in your face when you are teaching Catherine's daughter to make pie crust, or when you are kneading bread dough for Sunday dinner. You light up in a way that is different from anything else. So let me give you that space, that place where you can do what you love just for the joy of it." Tears filled Clara's eyes. After all these years, Isaac still saw her so clearly, still understood what she needed sometimes before she knew it herself. "That would be wonderful," she said softly. Thank you," Isaac said, kissing her temple, "for saying yes to a cowboy with more hope than sense. For building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home and a purpose, for being the best thing that ever happened to me." "We were the best thing that happened to each other," Clara said. "We saved each other, Isaac. We built each other up when the world tried to tear us down." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, and from the barn came the soft whicker of horses settling in for sleep. The sky above them was vast and filled with stars, the same stars that had watched over Clara's bakery on that morning when everything seemed lost, the same stars that had shone on their wedding day and the births of their children and every important moment in between. "I want you to know," Isaac said eventually, his voice quiet but firm, "that if I had to do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every choice, every moment, every hardship and triumph, they all led me here. To you, to this family, to this life. I am the luckiest man alive, Clara Quinn." "I am the lucky one," Clara said. You walked into my darkest moment and brought light. You believed in me when I was struggling to believe in myself. You loved me not despite my struggles, but because you saw how I faced them. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." As they sat together under the stars, Clara thought about the long road that had brought them here. The grief of losing her parents, the courage it had taken to travel west alone, the pride of building her bakery from nothing, the crushing devastation of the rumors, the isolation and fear as her customers abandoned her. And then Isaac, walking through her door like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice, buying everything she had and spreading the truth with the same determination that others had used to spread lies. Their love story was not a fairy tale. There had been struggles and hardships, times when money was tight and the future uncertain, moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it had been worth every difficult moment. The years that followed were golden ones. Isaac retired from the ranch at 60, and true to his word, he built Clara a beautiful bakehouse with a large oven and plenty of workspace. Clara spent her retirement doing what she loved, baking for her family and teaching her grandchildren the skills her grandmother had taught her. The kitchen became a gathering place, somewhere warm and welcoming where the smell of bread always lingered and love was as much an ingredient as flour or sugar. James took over management of the ranch, proving himself as capable as his father. His breeding program became known throughout the territory, and people came from hundreds of miles away to buy his horses. Catherine's school thrived, producing a generation of educated young people who went on to make their marks on the world. Alice and her husband eventually moved back to New Mexico, buying a small ranch near White Oaks so that Alice could be closer to her aging parents. Clara and Isaac grew old together with grace and humor, their love deepening into something that went beyond passion or romance. It was partnership in its truest form, two people who knew each other so completely that words were often unnecessary. They could communicate with a glance, could anticipate each other's needs, could provide comfort or joy or companionship with an ease that came from decades of practice. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a party that brought together people from across 3 counties. The celebration was held at the ranch, with long tables set up outside and enough food to feed an army. Person after person came up to Isaac and Clara to share stories about how they had been inspired by their love, their commitment, their example of what a good marriage could be. The mayor of White Oaks gave a speech, talking about how Clara had faced adversity with courage, and how Isaac had stood by her when it would have been easier to walk away. "They remind us," the mayor said, "that reputation is not as important as character, that love is not just a feeling but a choice we make every day, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for. We are all better for having them in our community." After the speeches and the toasts, after the dancing and the music, and the cutting of the enormous cake that Catherine had made, Clara and Isaac slipped away from the crowd. They walked out to the spot where Isaac had proposed all those years ago, the small rise that overlooked the valley, and stood together watching the sun set in shades of orange and gold and purple. 40 years, Clara said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and forever at the same time. "I know what you mean," Isaac said. He looked older now, his hair entirely silver, his face deeply lined from years in the sun. But his eyes were still the same storm gray that Clara had fallen in love with, still full of warmth and intelligence and humor. "But if I could go back to that day in the bakery, knowing everything that was ahead of us, all the challenges and joys, I would still walk through that door. I would still buy out your stock. I would still spread the truth. Because you are worth it, Clara. You always have been. Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. They had weathered so much together. The loss of loved ones, financial struggles, the normal ups and downs of raising children and running a ranch. They had faced it all side by side, neither of them perfect, but both of them committed to making it work. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" Clara asked. "About building a life together." "I remember," Isaac said softly. "I have been thinking about that lately," Clara continued. "About how when you build something, you do not really see what you have made until you step back and look at the whole picture. We have been so busy living our lives, raising our children, working and loving and struggling through each day. But now, from here, I can see it all. I can see what we built, Isaac, and it is beautiful. It is so much more than I ever dreamed possible." Isaac turned to face her, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "We did build something beautiful," he agreed. "Not just the house or the family or the businesses. We built a love that lasted, Clara. We built trust and partnership and respect. We built a legacy that will outlive us both. That is the most important thing we could have done." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had loved each other for 4 decades and would love each other for however many years remained. And in that kiss was everything that words could not express. Gratitude and passion, comfort and desire, the deep abiding certainty that they had chosen right when they chose each other. The party continued late into the night, but Clara and Isaac did not return to it. Instead, they walked slowly back to their house, hand in hand, and sat on their porch one more time. They talked about their favorite memories, laughed about the challenges they had overcome, wondered what the future held for their children and grandchildren. "I hope they find what we found," Clara said. "Not the same thing because everyone's path is different, but I hope they find love that lasts, love that chooses to show up every day even when it is hard. I hope they find partners who see them clearly and love them anyway." "They have a good example to follow," Isaac said. "We showed them what real love looks like. Now it is up to them to build their own lives." As they sat in the darkness, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. Her life had not been easy, but it had been good. She had faced hardship and overcome it. She had built something meaningful from nothing. She had loved and been loved in return. What more could anyone ask for? The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Clara and Isaac celebrated their 50th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a family tree that had grown far beyond what either of them could have imagined. They had health scares and recoveries, losses that brought grief and births that brought joy. They watched the world change around them, new technologies and new ideas transforming the West they had known, but through it all, their love remained constant. When Isaac was 70, he fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. For weeks, Clara nursed him, barely sleeping as she tended to his needs, terrified that she might lose him after all these years. But Isaac was stubborn, and he fought his way back to health with the same determination he had brought to every challenge in his life. When he was finally strong enough to sit up in bed, he looked at Clara with tears in his eyes. "I am not ready to leave you yet," he said hoarsely. "We have more time. We have to have more time." "We have all the time we need," Clara said, holding his hand tightly. "You are not going anywhere without me, Isaac Quinn." Isaac recovered, though he was never quite as strong as he had been before. He moved more slowly, tired more easily, but his mind remained sharp and his love for Clara never dimmed. They spent their days together, reading and talking and watching their family grow. They saw James's grandchildren born, little ones who would carry their legacy forward into a future they could barely imagine. On a warm spring day in 1933, when they had been married for 55 years, Isaac and Clara sat on their porch for what would be the last time. Isaac had been failing for weeks, his body simply wearing out after decades of hard use. He knew he was dying, and Clara knew it too, though neither of them spoke the words aloud. "I love you," Isaac said, his voice weak but clear. "I have loved you every day of my life since the moment I met you. You made me better than I was. You gave me purpose and joy and a family I am so proud of. If there is anything beyond this life, Clara, I will be waiting for you there. And if there is not, then I am grateful for every moment we had together." Clara was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she managed to smile. "I love you too. You saved me, Isaac. Not just that day in the bakery, but every day after. You showed me what real love looks like. You gave me everything that matters." Isaac reached up with shaking hands and wiped away her tears. "Do not mourn too long," he said gently. "Live, Clara. Keep baking and teaching and loving our family. Keep being the brave woman I fell in love with. That is all I want. That is my only request." "I will try," Clara promised, though she could not imagine her life without him in it. Isaac closed his eyes, a small smile on his face, and slipped peacefully away with Clara's hand in his. He died as he had lived, with grace and courage, surrounded by love. The funeral was enormous, drawing people from across the state. Isaac had touched so many lives with his honesty and kindness, his willingness to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. People told stories about him for hours, about his skill with horses, his fairness as a manager, his devotion to his family. But the story that resonated most was the one about how he had walked into a bakery in White Oaks and bought everything, how he had spread the truth when lies were easier, how he had fallen in love with a woman everyone else had abandoned. "He saw what others did not," the Reverend said during the service. "He saw truth and integrity and courage where others saw only rumor and suspicion. And because he chose to look deeper, because he chose to believe in Clara Rosewood, he gained a life partner, a family, and a love that inspired everyone who witnessed it." Isaac Quinn's greatest achievement was not his success at the ranch or his skill with animals. It was the love he built with his wife and the family they created together. After Isaac was buried next to the plot that would someday hold Clara, after the mourners had gone home and the house had quieted, Clara sat on her porch alone for the first time in 55 years. She felt the absence of Isaac like a physical wound, a hollowness that nothing could fill. But she also felt his presence, as though he was sitting beside her one more time, his hand in hers, his voice low and warm in her ear. "You have to keep going," she could almost hear him saying. "For the children, for the grandchildren, for yourself. Keep living, Clara. That is how you honor what we had." So she did. Clara lived for 8 more years, filling her days with family and baking and the simple pleasures of a life well lived. She taught her great-grandchildren the recipes her grandmother had taught her, passing down not just instructions but stories, the history of where they came from and how they had survived. She told them about the bakery in White Oaks, about the cruel rumors, about the cowboy who had saved her by believing in her when no one else would. "Real love," she told them, "is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. Real love is about showing up every day and choosing to believe in each other even when things are hard. Your great-grandfather taught me that. He walked into my life when I needed him most, and he stayed. That is what love is. It shows up and it stays." On a peaceful summer evening in 1941, Clara passed away in her sleep at the age of 80. She was buried beside Isaac, and on her headstone, her children inscribed the words that best captured who she had been: baker, wife, mother. She stood firm when others fell away, and she loved with her whole heart until the very end. The legacy of Clara and Isaac lived on through their descendants. James's horse breeding program became famous throughout the Southwest. Catherine's students went on to become teachers themselves, spreading education across the region. Alice's children and grandchildren continued ranching in Colorado, carrying forward the values their grandparents had instilled. And in White Oaks, the building that had once been Clara's bakery became a historical site, a reminder of how courage and love could triumph over cruelty and fear. The story of the baker and the cowboy became legend in Lincoln County, told and retold with slight variations, but always hitting the same essential notes. A woman facing impossible odds, a man who chose to believe in her, a love that lasted a lifetime. It became the standard against which other love stories were measured, proof that real romance was not about perfection, but about two imperfect people choosing each other again and again, no matter what came their way. And if you had asked either Clara or Isaac in those golden years when they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, if they had any regrets, they would have said no. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that would outlast them both. They had faced hardship and triumph, loss and joy, and through it all, they had never let go of each other's hands. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the bakery or the ranch or the money or the success. It was the love, pure and simple and enduring. It was the choice they made every single day to show up for each other, to believe in each other, to build a life together that was worth living. That was their true legacy, the thing that made their story worth telling. They proved that when you stand firm in your truth and open your heart to love, magic can happen. The impossible becomes possible. And two people who should have been strangers become everything to each other, partners and lovers and best friends who face the world together until their very last breath. Their love story began with bread and rumors and a cowboy's faith. It continued through marriage and children, and the everyday work of building a life. And it ended only when death parted them, though even then, the love they built remained, echoing through the generations, inspiring everyone who heard their tale to believe that true love was possible, that it was worth fighting for, and that it could last forever if you were brave enough to hold on. The end.